Well, here we are, guys. We have finally grabbed a KTM 390 Adventure R. This is the entirely all new, latest and greatest KTM adventure bike, and it is the smallest in their adventure bike capacity range. Now, they do make a KTM in 390 Enduro, which we're going to test separately, but today we're going to focus on the KTM Adventure R. Now, this bike has, you've got to think, they've pretty much started from the ground up. They did have a 390 before this, which we tested years ago, but it was way more road oriented than this version. This version even looks more rally with the big fairing and the seat, but this is their most serious off-road, small capacity, in inverted commas, adventure bikes that they've pretty much produced in a very long time. It has a pretty much reworked LC4 motor. People are familiar with the LC4. This has a new cylinder head, a whole bunch of new different internals as well. It's got a new swing arm, it's got a new frame, it's got updated new suspension, it gets ride modes, it has a whole new fairing and everything up front, all new bodywork from front to rear. So this bike is really an all new model. They are using a very familiar base for the motor, which is that LC4, but the rest of it, it's pretty much brand new. One of the things we're going to look forward to most about testing is all the new tech in this entry-level KTM 390 Adventure R. So it gets a new TFT display, but it also gets all the new ride modes, traction control, ABS. It even has a, in the off-road mode in this particular model, you can adjust how responsive the throttle is. So we're really keen to test that. That's usually stuff you find on far more expensive, higher-end KTM machines, but KTM have made it on this 390 Adventure R. So we're keen to test that and see how it goes. So the new chassis is a two-piece steel trellis frame, and that's kind of designed for more off-road stability. It's a firmer, stiffer, more rigid frame, and KTM have done that so that it'll handle bigger braking bumps, bigger potholes, so you can kind of charge, or you're meant to be able to charge harder into corners, which we're going to be keen to see how that goes, because the frame on an adventure bike is really important because it gives you all your flex characteristics depending on how much weight you're going to pour onto this thing. So it also gets a bolt-on steel trellis subframe. Now the best thing about that is that if you do have an end for ender, you can unbolt the subframe. If it's bent and twisted into a shape that cannot be repaired, you can bolt it off and you can then bolt a new one on. So it's kind of convenient, it's sleeker, and it actually works in with the one-piece seat. It gets a gravity die-cast swing arm that it does share with the KTM 390 Enduro. I mean, it shares most of these parts with the 390 Enduro, except for some of the other stuff we're going to list in a second. But that swing arm, it is all new for 2025 and 6, and all new on this model. Now, the Adventure R gets the big tank. It gets a big 14-litre tank. It's slimmer, and it's kind of rally-shaped. Kind of think Daniel Sanders factory KTM, but for us as punters. So that's different to the Enduro R, and it's quite a big tank. 14 litres is plenty big enough. We've been told we'll get about 250 kilometres, so we're going to test that as well and see how far the tank goes. So the rally-inspired tower gets a whole bunch of LED stuff on it. It's got the fancy TFT display, like I said, that's all new, and it gets LEDs out the front too. So I think the LEDs, personally, I prefer them for riding at night. I prefer the kind of light that they put out. I think the light goes further. So that's all new as well for this all new model. And of course, you get the new seat, new graphics. The cool thing about the seat is this is slightly lower than the 390 Enduro R. This seat is about 20 mils lower than the Enduro. I believe it's about 870 mils high. So if you're maybe shorter of stature, this would be probably a better bike than the Enduro R because you can get your leg over it. So suspension setup on this, again, it's new. This is not the same as the suspension we had on the previous 390. It is that 43 mil WP gear, but it's an open cartridge system, and it comes fully adjustable with compression and rebound. You get about 230 mils of travel on the front. Out the rear, you've got that separate piston WP APX shock setup. You get about 230 mils of travel at the rear as well, and it's got preload adjustment on top of the compression and rebound as well. And of course, because this is now an off-road model, you get 21-inch front and 18-inch rear, and they're spoked wheels too, no cast alloy, no funny size front wheel, it's more road oriented. This is the real deal for off-road riding with the wheel setup. We're really keen to try the WP shock because it has preload adjustment, and preload adjustment is pretty handy. You need a tool. It's not the little hand knob that you can adjust, but you can move the preload. And I think on a bike where you are going to load up with panniers and maybe even a pillion, having adjustable preload so you can wind it up a little bit is a big benefit. So the brake system is obviously new too. You get the single disc at the front and the single obviously disc at the rear, but the single disc at the front has a pretty large, I think it's a 320 mil disc at the front. ABS both front and rear as well, and that's adjustable through the maps, which I'm going to talk you through in a second. And of course it gets adjustable levers, and it gets the full suite of mapping that you can adjust from the handlebars. Now there's no cruise control that comes standard on this vehicle. It is just over $11,000, about $11,200, so you can't expect too much, but cruise control is really one of the only things missing from this bike. Now this new LC4 engine, well I say new, it is an LC4 that we've seen before, but it has had significant changes to it. It's actually been seen in the Duke 390 in years gone by, and they've just kind of adjusted and updated it for the Adventure. Service intervals are pretty good. You've got 1,000 Ks for your first run in service, which is pretty normal. Then you've got about 10,000 Ks after that between services, which Australia's a big country. You're going to do 30 or 40,000 Ks if you want to get around Australia in say 6 months. So you've got about 3 or 4 serious services in that period because of the 10,000 kilometre service intervals. Because don't forget, this has to meet the new Euro 5.2 emissions regulations, and so the injectors kind of help them get there as well. It gets a new airbox. This is mounted higher off the ground than the previous one, and that's a massive benefit because when you're going through river crossings or deep puddles, you certainly don't want any water in and around that airbox. So having the higher airbox is certainly an added benefit for adventure riders. And the exhaust is obviously new too. Now it pops out the bottom instead of popping out the top. It is a stainless steel system, and we're going to be keen to see how that exhaust system goes, because it does worry me just slightly that it's down low and it's, you know, vulnerable to water going in if you stall or something happens in the middle of a creek, which is, you know, this is things that are going to happen on adventure rides. So the exhaust is new, it's stainless steel, it runs under the bike, and yeah, we'll see if there's any issues when we come to river crossings. And the gearbox is new too, what a surprise. It gets new shift drum and fork pin guides for smoother shifts, and it has a shorter lever throw, so it's a little bit easier to get your foot up and under unless you've got big feet. And if that's the case, you're gonna have to go with a bigger lever. And the clutch, no surprise, new gearbox and a reworked motor means a new clutch, so you get a power assisted slipper clutch, which is lighter and easier, and then there is the optional quick shifter. Now this vehicle is fitted with the quick shifter, it's around about $400 to $500 to fit, and it just means you just don't have to think about the clutch when you're shifting gears. So one of the important things to notice is that this is a cable clutch, not a hydraulic clutch. Now we're used to KTM Group coming out with a hydraulic clutch only. So this surprises me. I'm pulling on it now and it feels nice and light, but I'm really keen to see if that clutch feel starts to fade at all during the day, especially if we get any nasty hill climbs where we've got to be on and off the clutch, or maybe a lot of river work. But at this stage, it feels really light, but it is important to note that that's a cable unit for KTM. Now, there are also ride modes. So the KTM 390 Adventure gets the full suite of ride modes. The Enduro R gets the slightly less ride modes. With this one, you get off-road, street, and wet. Now, off-road has the most adjustability. You can adjust traction control, you can adjust ABS, and you can just adjust your throttle, how responsive the throttle is. You can't adjust, which you can in the more expensive, bigger capacity KTMs, you can't adjust the motor map. So you can't say put, for example, the wet map into the off-road mode, but you can adjust ABS, traction control, and with this mode, because the quick shifter is fitted, you can even adjust the quick shifter and as well as that throttle response in the off-road mode. Now in the street mode, you can do all those things except for the responsiveness of the throttle, you can't adjust that. And then in the wet mode, it's the same as the street mode, you can make those adjustments there too. So this particular Adventure, we get the Adventure R here in Australia, and it gets that cornering motorcycle traction control. So as you're going around the corner, it'll sense using a 3D sensor if it needs to retard the rear wheel so that you don't kind of lose traction and your front end catches up with your rear end catches up with your front end, I should say. And like I said, this gets the brand new 5-inch TFT display. It's far easier to see. You can even change the way it displays, so it can just show you the speed and the gear that it's in. All right, I think I've tried to wrap up everything that's kind of new on this bike. It's all new, so it's very difficult to kind of sit here and go through with you guys everything that is and isn't new. We're really keen to test it. We're going to jump on this bike for a couple of days. We've got it for 2 weeks, and we're going to kind of go for a bunch of adventure rides. We're going to try and single track it. We're going to do some commuting on it. We're going to do everything that we think anyone buying a KTM 390 Adventure R would do. And we're going to come back to you and let you know what we thought once we've had a good run on it. All right, guys, that's a wrap on the KTM 390 Adventure. We've had a lot of fun on this bike, probably more fun than I expected, and I think that's mainly because of the motor. The mid and the top in this 390 doesn't feel like a 390. It feels stronger than a 390. It's kind of revs for longer than you'd expect a 390, and it's got more response and more pickup than I ever expected for a 390. Now this is a genuine 390 as opposed to the predecessor, which wasn't in the KTM range, and that motor is probably the standout. Now we did have a little bit of bogging, or not bogging, just a little bit of flame out right off the bottom as you'd let the clutch out. It's quite a tall geared bike. It's designed for adventure riding and faster speeds, so not like an EXC KTM. So we just noticed that occasionally we'd stall it and the clutch out trying to get out of some snotty stuff, so we just had to keep the revs up a little bit. Apart from that, the motor was fantastic. So the other thing that we really liked about this bike was the fairing setup. So it's a kind of an odd thing to put as probably our second favourite aspect of the bike, but we found that this plastic fairing on the front did a really good job at wind buffering. We hardly noticed kind of any wind hitting up underneath our head, and that really helps on those highway sections when you're into a headwind and you're coming home late and you feel like your body's getting blown around a fair bit. We were able to do up to 100 kilometers an hour with this bike, and we didn't feel like we were buffered at all. So a big thumbs up to the fairing on this bike. It's an exceptional piece of kit. It's shaped exactly how you'd want it to be shaped. So let's talk about the suspension, and for an entry-level adventure bike, it's pretty much exactly what you'd expect. It's quite plush and soft across a lot of the choppy, smaller bumps, which makes it very comfortable to ride. But if you are going to send it off an erosion mound like we did a couple of times, we did bottom the fork. The shock was fine, but the fork, we tried to wind the clickers. It has plenty of adjustment, as I've explained earlier. We did try and wind the clickers to make it a little bit firmer, and that did help just marginally, but we did notice it just bottomed if you tried to send the thing 4, 5, 6 feet into the air, but not many people are going to do that with this bike. For most of the big bumps, you hit the erosion mound and the corrugation and the rocks and the creek beds. The suspension is incredibly plush, and with all that adjustment, you can really make it suit your kind of riding. And don't forget, it's WP suspension. For a bike that's around $11,000, you're getting WP suspension. That's a pretty good value for money offer that KTM have there. Now, one of the really cool things about this bike, being an entry-level bike, don't forget it's 11 grand, is the riding modes. So you get 3 different options to pick from that changes the traction control, the ABS, and the throttle response, and also the mapping. So you've got street, you've got wet, and you've got off-road. Now, they're pretty straightforward. You can understand what they mean. We found that the off-road was actually the more aggressive map of the lot. It had the best throttle response, which you could then go in and change, as we'll show you in a second. But then you could also go across to the wet map, which had not much throttle response, so you don't spin out and you don't end up getting your arse end catching up to your front. It had a really nice smooth throttle response for those wet slippery sections we were doing as well. And then the street mode kind of was just a very comfortable way of riding the bike, probably for commuting. It's not designed to be raced through the twisties against your mates on bikes that are 3 times the capacity. So the street mode actually had less response in the engine than the off-road mode, but it did make it an excellent commuting style of power because it was quite linear and it was easier to put on and off. Now, one of the other things that we liked was the chassis. We feel like it's got a really good standing and seating position. The Adventure has a slightly lower seat than the Enduro, which we're also testing. And I think the lower seat will suit those that maybe aren't as confident on adventure bikes or that may be shorter of stature. But we actually found, I'm 6'1" or 2", and I didn't mind the lower seat. I didn't feel cramped on this bike. Sometimes the rider triangle between the foot pegs, the seat and the handlebars can feel cramped when they have a slightly scalloped out seat like this, but it's not how I felt at all. I never felt cramped. I felt comfortable sitting and standing for long periods of testing. Okay, some of the things that people might be a little bit wary of are the exhaust. The exhaust comes out the bottom here, and it's not an exhaust like we're typically used to on an off-road bike that comes up behind the rear mudguard. Look, we crossed a fair few rivers today. As you can see, we had a lot of rain in the lead up to our test, and we didn't have any issue with water going back up the exhaust pipe and creating problems. You can get aftermarket exhaust as well for this model that still runs in the same line but just has a bit more performance. So we're keen to try one of those in the future, but the exhaust was okay for us. Braking on this bike was also pretty impressive. They've got ABS front and rear, and that comes on and off as you go through your different modes. With the off-road mode, you've only got a slight amount of ABS on the rear, and then with the wet mode, you've got the most ABS, and the street is somewhere in between. You can also toggle the ABS on or off entirely. Now, the front is a single disc and we thought it stopped pretty well. The rear is also a single disc, it stopped well. Look, in a perfect world, if this bike was a more expensive bike, I would expect it to have probably dual front discs, maybe even for a smaller capacity bike. This thing, I'm sure once you put everything that you want on it, they're 170-ish kilos. And I think if you'd add stuff to it, like panniers and bits and pieces, you might get up to 190 kilos. Dual discs on the front would be nice, but for $11,000, the single disc stopper is excellent. One of the other big benefits to this bike is it comes standard with a lovely big tank. You're going to get over 250 kilometers out of this tank. As we discovered today, we've been riding all day and we haven't had to fuel up at all, and we haven't even gone through half a tank. So it's super fuel efficient. And yeah, we have found that the bigger tank on this bike as opposed to the Enduro is going to be far more suited to those who just want to adventure ride this bike and do nothing else. So that's all I got for you on the KTM 390 Adventure. We have absolutely loved this bike. It's a great entry-level, cheap adventure bike for people looking to get into the sport, or for someone, say, even downsizing off a real big bike and they don't want to manhandle a 220 kilo bike with all the power in the world. This thing is like that, just with far more usable power and far more controllable weight. We would certainly be very comfortable going around Australia on it and doing any kind of adventure riding you would on a bigger bike on this bike. And that's coming from someone who has ridden every single 1200cc capacity adventure bike you can possibly ride. I had so much fun on this bike. It is an excellent piece of kit from KTM, and it's really cool to see them provide us with a machine in that more affordable kind of entry-level cost price as well. So stay tuned, we're going to hopefully pick one of these up in a couple of months and do a few more adventure tests with us, and yeah, really head as far out into the middle of nowhere as we can and test the limit on this KTM 390 Adventure.